Welcome back to Crudax Season 3. This season, we are looking into the Houston mass murders, the crimes of Dean Corll, also known as the Candyman. And we're also looking into his two accomplices, Elmer Wayne Henley Jr. and David Owen Brooks. So far, we are getting towards the end of the season, but we are right in the middle of looking into an aspect of the Houston mass murders that there's a lot of conspiracy around, and it's called the Syndicate. So this is part 3, the Syndicate. Previously, on episode 2 of this, I explored the disturbing world of boy sex trafficking and child exploitation material in the United States. This was in the 1970s. My goal this season, or at least in this part of this season, is to find out whether or not Dean Corll was connected to a sex trafficking ring. And if he was, who was involved and why, and this is the important part, why it wasn't investigated further. In our last episode, I talked about the boys for sale industry, that's also known as the chicken hawk trade. And I discussed an episode of Alternative Views. And this was a TV show back in the day. I found this on YouTube. Has Dr. Philpott in it and a very young Mark McKinnon. And on the show, Alternative Views, they discussed a documentary called Boys for Sale. And they talked about how the industry that was interwoven with legitimate businesses and that prominent individuals were participating in it and helping cover it up. I concluded the episode with my belief that organized crime played a central role in it. So I'm picking up from there on this episode, and we're going to examine that connection further as, of course, we transition into new revelations. So now that we've set the stage, I have a lot to talk about. Let's get started. I'm Jen Schaefer, and this is Crudax Season 3, The Houston Mass Murders, The Syndicate, Part 3. In my last episode, I discussed the 1981 documentary Boys for Sale. That was discussed and examined in depth on a show called Alternative Views. I found a recording of the show on YouTube. You can go check it out yourself. You could just type in Boys for Sale in the search bar and you'll find it. Boys for Sale was actually an independent project, and it documented boy prostitution in Houston, revealing its prevalence in our city beyond what anyone could have imagined. It also made claims that information about the industry was suppressed by people with significant wealth and influence, that Texas bankers and the wealthy elite were instrumental in covering it up because they were involved in some capacity, whether it was financial or they themselves were customers. The boys who were interviewed in the documentary Boys for Sale were around 14, 15 years old, and they described the structure and the dangers of their world. They spoke about being threatened, hurt, or even killed if they tried to leave. One boy featured in the documentary was actually found dead, which is wild and heartbreaking. And I'm still trying to figure out who he was. They didn't name him in the show, of course, for his safety, even though what happened to him is what happened to him. If anyone knows anything on that, it's supposedly they found his body in Missouri. He's from the documentary. You'll see him on there. If anyone wants to do a deep dive on that and finds out anything, just let me know, shoot me a message or an email or something like that. You can just go to my website. Here's the thing. The boys that were in the documentary and the boys on the streets in general, they were not the only ones who feared for their lives when talking about what was going on. The reporters, the professors investigating the underworld were also at risk. They faced physical threats Just like the boys, some were violently attacked. Some were, and this is according to them, some were kneecapped, and they had acid thrown in their face, which is crazy. Some were even killed. In 1982, less than a year after the release of the program Boys for Sale, a journalist named Victoria Lowe wrote an article titled The Case of the Campus Crusader for our Texas news magazine called Texas Monthly. And I'm sure most of you have heard about it. So in this 1982 magazine, there was an article about Dr. Tom Philpott and the challenges he faced while attempting to uncover the elite who were involved in the child exploitation epidemic. He told her, and she interviewed him for the article, he told her that he was constantly spied on and constantly threatened, that they sent emissaries to provoke him into violent confrontations. His phone was bugged. They repeatedly broke into his apartment. One day even, while he was driving on the freeway, a passenger in another car pointed a rifle at him. He even stated that some of his colleagues had been shot at and had to hire bodyguards for their protection. On October 27th, 1982, this is shortly after Boys for Sale aired, Dr. Tom Philpott was shot. He reported that two men broke into his apartment, that they tried to force him to take his own life with a gun. So you know how that looks. It's been in movies and things like that. So they tried to get him to point the gun at him, to fire the gun, to take his own life. He fought them off. They left. They ran out. He called the cops. They came out. They investigated his claims. And then the police said that his story was inconsistent with the evidence and that they suspected that he shot himself for publicity or for sympathy. And they said that he attempted this before, which this is something that Tom Philpott admitted to, that he attempted to take his life before by overdosing. So it was just kind of an easy thing to turn around and say, well, he did it himself. But of course, knowing how the chicken hawk industry covers up things and was covered up, who knows? I don't know. But here is the thing. At this time, Dr. Philpott wasn't the only one. There was another man named Dr. James Boudry, who was a professor at Northern Illinois University, and he was pursuing similar investigations. He was looking specifically into runaway boys and them entering into sex trafficking. His research led him to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and soon thereafter, he was there for a little bit, and then he put together his findings, and he talked about him at a symposium in 1981. Then, when he did this, he confided in a colleague that he felt like he was being threatened after his discoveries. And then, in mid-1982, someone gunned him down. He was shot and killed after he left a bar called Johnny's Village Inn in Fort Lauderdale. He died immediately at the scene. There were two individuals who were arrested, Webster Herbert Schroeder, who was 19, and then a guy named Eric Williams, who was 20. So they were arrested and they faced charges. This guy, Schroeder, went on to have a lengthy rap sheet, from throwing a missile into a vehicle to cocaine possession, to battery of a police officer, to, this one's kind of weird and kind of funny, to riding a bike with no hands on the handlebars. I didn't know that you could be arrested for that, but the guy was. And then Eric Williams, the other guy, his only charge was second-degree murder from 1982, which we know what that is. And that was it. That was the only thing that he had on it. So one had a very lengthy rap sheet. One had nothing but the murder. What this kind of says is, yes, the motive for Boudry's killing could have been simple robbery, but who knows? These guys could have been hired to kill him as well. So who knows what happened there? But it's interesting that he was looking into a certain industry and met his fate. He did. Fast forward to October 9th, 1991, Dr. Tom Philpott, the UT professor who had built his reputation on fearless journalism and work as a professor. He was very well respected, and the students really loved him. he was discovered lifeless in his apartment with a gunshot wound to the head, eerily similar to what he stated those previous intruders had attempted to get him to do 10 years prior to this. Austin police ruled it as self-inflicted, but this was not after conducting a meaningful investigation, from what I read. There was a lot of fueled speculation that his death was connected to the sensitive subjects of his research, what I'm researching now, so there's that. And it's one of those open-ended who knows. But I will say this. When you watch the show, Boys for Sale, if you go check it out, you notice how disturbed Dr. Philpott looks when he's talking about it. You can tell it weighs really heavy on him. And hard to tell, maybe if the work got to him, or if the work got to him. You know what I mean? So honestly, it could have been either way. I don't know. But it's a very nice, neat cover-up if what we think happened. On that note, I just want to go over the things that Dr. Philpott and what we've learned along the way through our deep dive into this industry. In America, the chicken hawk trade was a nationwide industry that preyed on underage, vulnerable boys. Wealthy men were often at the helm of this industry. Some were tried, some were convicted, some fled the country and were never brought to justice or ever seen again. Such networks included newsletters like the Hermes newsletter. The newsletters and groups lead you to a man named John David Norman, who headed up the Odyssey Foundation in Dallas and the Delta Project in Chicago, both sex trafficking rings. And he was at the center and connected to all these men. Through publications, they also taught pedophiles who subscribed to them how to infiltrate churches and legitimate nonprofits, and not to mention the Boy Scouts of America. And you can check out the perversion files if you want to. It's good for education. It's bad for your mind. It's really just, I can't believe the depravity of some people. The men that ran the organizations, they did this through fake nonprofits that were set up to look normal and look great. And they were set up to traffic boys while receiving tax benefits. Many clients were wealthy, affluent men. Some were in powerful positions in government. Some were industry giants or headed up big banks. And I haven't mentioned this yet, and I totally forgot to bring it up. There's a group called NAMBLA, and it's AKA North American Man-Boy Love Association. That is, and I say is, an organization because it is still up and running, and they advocate for adult-minor relationships to be legal. They are still up and running, just like I said. You can find them online at www.nambla.org if you want to go and message them, whatever you want to message them. I'm going to rant for a second. And this is what really, and pardon my French, it pisses me off about this organization. Of course, it is what they do and what they stand for and what they advocate to do and what they want to do. But then, of course, second is the fact that they cloak it in the fight for gay rights, right? So they cloak what they're fighting for in the gay rights fight. And that really makes me angry. On behalf of the LGBTQIA population, and in the words of one Miss Gresham Wiener, you cannot sit with us. The gays do not want you, NAMBLA. So go away, take your illegal and gross message with you. That's NAMBLA. They're all part of this as well. They were formed in the 70s. They're still going on now. Back to our program. So in the documentary Boys for Sale, they stated that men at the biggest banks in Houston and Dallas were trying to suppress investigations into the boy pornography rings and the sex trafficking rings. While we don't know the exact banks or men behind it, there are tendrils that leads to certain banks and certain men. I went over that in our last episode if you want to go check that out. Like other states such as Michigan, Illinois, Louisiana, Florida, Massachusetts, California, and New York, Texas, the great state of Texas, had all the necessary components for this industry to thrive. But Texas, of course, seemed to hide it better and kept people quiet about it more efficiently. Texas is good at that. What got me thinking, though, is who is also really good at that is the mafia. And when you look at this, you can't not see organized crime all over the story of boy sex trafficking. You just can't. So following mafia trails, it leads to the same names I've already mentioned before. And then following those names leads to the mafia. It's a never-ending Ouroboros. So here's how the snake eats itself, if you will. And we're going to go over some things that we've already gone over, but we're going to lead it into more information. For me, this thing starts with Billy Byers Jr., who is at the center of it. I went over him in the last episode. He was indicted with his partner, Guy Straight, for child pornography. Both of these men were from Dallas. They were connected to John David Norman, who led the Odyssey Foundation. And this, by the way, was off of Cole Avenue. His address was less than a mile away from Cedar Springs Road, which back then was a hub for boy prostitution. It was similar to Montrose and Houston at the same time. But back to Billy Byers. So his dad was Billy Byers Sr., a wealthy oil man. He was deeply connected to politicians like Eisenhower and Lyndon B. Johnson, as well as other wealthy Texas oilmen like Clint Murchison Jr. In 1962, Billy Byers Sr., Billy Byers Jr.'s dad, so Billy Byers Sr. and Clint Murchison Sr. bought the Charlestown racetrack together in West Virginia. So these two men get together in 62, they buy a racetrack. And I want you to earmark that, okay? So these two men were close with J. Edgar Hoover. They've got 3 of them. They all socialized at the Del Charro Hotel in California, which was owned by Clint Murchison Sr. The Byers, both junior and senior, even shared adjacent bungalows with J. Edgar Hoover when they all visited the hotel at the same time. Billy Byers Jr., who, like I said, was indicted for child pornography and child sex trafficking, he was known to have underage boys at his California mansion. And he made exploitation movies with these underage boys. One was called Genesis Children. And he did one in Texas. He did a couple in Texas, but one was called Sandy Hill, which was near Brenham, Texas. So keep in mind that guy, Billy Byers Jr., we know it's a definite thing, right? Okay, so J. Edgar Hoover had a very close sidekick, and some assumed he was his lover, and his name was Clyde Colson. They both attended together Billy Byers Jr.'s 25th birthday party at the Del Charro Hotel. In the book titled The Secret Life of J. Edgar Hoover, writer Anthony Summers alleges it was at Murchison's hotel where mafia men Meyer Lansky and Frank Costello, this is where they were able to obtain the compromising photographs that they had of J. Edgar Hoover in homosexual encounters with Clyde Tolson and young boys. Allegedly, J. Edgar Hoover used his contacts with Billy Byers Jr. to facilitate his own type of party with underage boys. Anthony Summers interviewed a young man named Charles Krebs, who was close friends with Billy Byers Jr. He recalled that they would all go to a bar called Rudy's Earthside. He and Billy Byers Jr. would arrange for underage boys to come with them, and Hoover would leave with those boys to have a secret rendezvous in his parked car at a nearby reservoir. Krebs claimed that he decided to talk about these incidents and to out Hoover because he was a closeted hypocrite. Hoover always shot down any legislation that would help the gay community, and he fired anyone who he found out was gay. So this guy Krebs was like, well, I'm going to tell all about your stuff. So he told this reporter, and he included it in his book. Clint Murchison Sr., Billy Byers Sr., and J. Edgar Hoover, their connection wouldn't be complete without mentioning a man named Sid Richardson. And if you're from Texas, you know that name as well. He's another one of the big rich from the oil men. And Richardson was a perpetual bachelor who owned a private island called St. Joseph Island off the Texas coast. There he entertained Lyndon B. Johnson, J. Edgar Hoover, all those regular cats. This is some interesting stuff about him, okay? In 1969, Richardson's foundation opened the Sid Richardson Boy Scout Ranch, a 2,500-acre camp on Lake Bridgeport, northwest of Fort Worth. Richardson also had a nonprofit with Clint Murchison Sr. called Boys, Inc. Their stated mission was, quote, to fight juvenile delinquency and boy homelessness by establishing community recreation centers all across the country. Does that not sound familiar? Clint Murchison Sr.'s funding plan for this nonprofit was to acquire a racetrack, like the one he did with Billy Byers Sr., the Charleston racetrack. And he was going to operate them on a tax-free charitable basis, generating revenue through gambling and directing it to Boys, Inc. So you've got this boys nonprofit, and you've got what looks like to me organized crime connected to it. So remember what I told you about earmarking the racetrack bit. That's why I asked you to do that. So the big thing, of course, is that Clint Murchison Sr. had very close ties with the mafia. A 1955 Senate committee investigation found that the Genovese family owned 20% of the Murchison Oil Lease Company. 20% of this company was owned by the Genovese family. And Clint Murchison Sr. was also close with Meyer Lansky and Frank Costello. We know because they were at his little hotel. And of course, they were close-ish with J. Edgar Hoover. It's like they all had dirt on each other, but they all hung out together. And if you press further, if you keep looking into it, the lineage of that setup persists. Because if you fast forward to the 1960s and the 1970s, you get to Clint Murchison Jr. Like his father, he was highly connected to organized crime. He was investigated by 9 federal agencies and 2 congressional committees, and reports show that he fronted for organized crime syndicates. He had connections to the infamous Carlos Marcello family. They were the major New Orleans crime family, and Carlos Marcello was the crime boss. And Murchison was also allegedly connected to the Gambino family. He was tight with them. And that's interesting because according to an article in Time magazine, written November 28, 1977, that was titled Youth for Sale on the Streets, quote, the New York State Select Legislative Committee on Crime found that the mafia at that time moved back into prostitution because of the lucrative profits from child exploitation. Additionally, the commission concluded that the Gambino mafia family and other organized mobsters had extensive interest in child exploitation enterprises. In Dallas, the largest mafia presence in the 60s and 70s was the Pearl Street Mafia, led by Joseph Savello, who had big money ties and big political ties, and he even corrupted, allegedly, Dallas District Attorney Henry Wade. So it's no wonder all of this was gotten away with for so long, and they continue to get away with it. We know the mafia industries, narcotics, gambling, prostitution, they all work together, and it works best when they all work together. Now, to stack another Jenga block on this crumbling tower, Clint Murchison Jr. was also an original co-owner and founder of the Dallas Cowboys. He, along with his brother John, a guy named William Hahn, Bedford Wynn, and a man named Toddy Lee Wynn Jr., who I briefly talked about on my last episode. And he was kind of fit in with what could have been a profile for one of the Boys for Sale bankmen. We don't know for a fact, but there are some tendrils. If you want to know more about the mafia and the NFL and the rich men who own the teams, there is a book. It's called Interference: How Organized Crime Influenced Football by Dan Moldea. It's a really good deep dive if you want to learn more about that. What's interesting is this. So Clint Murchison Jr. also owned a private island called Spanish Key Island in the Bahamas. He often took his business partners there to party, especially a man named Robert F. Thompson, who was president of one of his companies. The two of them, along with some others, I just know the two of them, I'm not sure who the rest were, but they had a clique, and I kid you not, it was called the Chicken Club, which is very interesting given the subject of the chicken hog trade. Now, hear me out. Listen up before we get our panties in a twist. Everything I mentioned could just be coincidence. There could be, this might even sound like conspiracy theory, and I admit that, but I don't apologize for it. The term conspiracy theory is often used these days to shut down discussion and debate, almost to the point of being cliche. It's like if they don't like something, they call it propaganda or conspiracy theory or whatever. It's a very easy way to shut down that topic. But here's the thing. With no real investigation back then, except for a few brave journalists who ended up getting killed or some very few politicians, and with evidence being destroyed conveniently, conspiracy theory is unfortunately all we have to go on. I'm going to take a short detour here, and there's a reason for it, so you're going to have to stick with me. I know I'm kind of taking a roundabout way through things, but you have to understand the whole context and everything that was going on at the same time so you can really understand how it all works together. And this next topic is controversial, and I'll admit that. And I hope that you'll listen to the whole thing before you click off and be like, wow, it's a bunch of rubbish. But here we go. So we're going to go back to Anthony Summers' book. And in his book about J. Edgar Hoover, he went on about some of the Texas big rich, the Murchisons being a couple of them. And he talks about Clint Murchison Sr. and his political leanings, which were very, very far right-wing. He was a fervent supporter of state rights. We're in Texas. We are a state founded on the want for small government, and those sentiments exist to this day. But what Summers also found out about Clint Murchison Sr., this is according to him, he was a big financial backer of the anti-Semitic press, and that he and Sid Richardson were a primary source of money for the American Nazi Party and its leader, George Lincoln Rockwell. I know, the word Nazi. It's a hot button word right now. People are throwing it around left and right, but hear me out. That's not what I'm doing. I'm going to explain this in a full context. The American Nazi Party has some unique ties to what I'm trying to expose and what I'm talking about. And I'm going to start from the beginning so you can fully understand it. I had no idea that America had so many Nazis and Nazi sympathizers throughout time, from the time the Nazi Party was first formed. In the 1930s, we had the German-American Bund, which was a pro-Nazi organization that operated openly in the United States from 1936 to 1941. And the Bund had a huge rally in February 1939 at Madison Square Garden, and 20,000 people went to it. The Bund also ran youth camps all across the United States in New York, Jersey, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Illinois, and California. Don't those states sound familiar? I've already listed them in regarding another industry. In 1944, a faction of conservative Texas Democrats known as the Texas Regulars broke away from the party in opposition to FDR and his New Deal that passed in 1935. They were particularly against his wartime oil price controls for obvious reasons. Historian George N. Green's book, The Establishment in Texas Politics, described how the big rich financed and supported the political careers of many Texas politicians, those especially known for their segregationist views. This alliance created a powerful political machine that enforced its interests. Their platform openly called for, quote, the restoration of the supremacy of the white race, while campaign materials featured slogans like, quote, let's keep the white in Old Glory. Now, they, of course, failed to defeat Roosevelt back then, but the Texas regulars laid out ideological foundations that would, of course, come to shape conservative politics in Texas for decades. Not all of it, of course, but its own little faction. And many members eventually, of course, migrated to the Republican Party, especially during this time. Because, like I said, their guy was LBJ. Murchison's guy was LBJ, Democrat. All those guys, their guy was LBJ. But then he signed the Civil Rights Act, and they saw this as a betrayal. So that was a big part of the reason that they abandoned the Democrats and went over and took over the Republican Party. So the Texas regulars, they had a northern counterpart, and their northern counterpart was called the Liberty League men. And these were also super rich industry men. You had Rockefeller with Standard Oil, Henry Ford with Ford Motors. You had the DuPont family and Albert Sloan, who headed up General Motors. All of these companies, by the way, financially supported the Nazis during World War II. The DuPonts also financed a group called the Black Legion, a secret white supremacist terrorist group that was more violent than the KKK. It was active primarily in the 1930s and 40s in Ohio and Michigan. Now, not to only pick on Republicans, in the 1970s, Joe Biden was totally connected to the DuPont family. His first Senate campaign in 1972 was staffed in part by DuPont employees. He celebrated his election victory in the Gold Ballroom of Hotel DuPont. In 1974, he purchased a DuPont family mansion in Wilmington, Delaware, and he even nicknamed it the station and headed his campaign there. Biden's son, Hunter Biden, I don't know if you've heard of him, Hunter Biden dated a DuPont heir. So if that just doesn't tie everything in together, that in that capacity. Over at General Motors, which was led by the Fisher family, they named a man named Harold Lee Bush, a high-up financial executive there. His son, Christopher Bush, was identified as a suspected pedophile in connection to the Oakland County child killings investigation in the 1970s. I think I went over that in our last episode. Charles Bush, of course, was connected to Francis Sheldon, who ran the North Fox Island sex trafficking ring. We talked about him. Sheldon was closely linked to the Fisher family as well. Alfred J. Fisher Jr.'s wife, I'm going to say this, look at juniors. It's like all the really sketch ones are juniors. Anyway, his wife's family was from Grosse Pointe, Michigan, the same place that the Sheldon family was from. So Francis Sheldon's family was from, and they were like these wealthy families in this city, and they all ran in the same circle. So they're all interconnected, which is just weird and gross. Add to that, in the late 1950s and early 1960s, you've got George Lincoln Rockwell, and he started the American Nazi Party with help from a wealthy heir named Harold Arrowsmith. It's arrow like as in you shoot an arrow and then Smith, so Arrowsmith. I didn't even recognize it until I said it out loud that it was Arrowsmith. Anyway, Harold Arrowsmith from Baltimore, and of course, we've already mentioned the big rich as well. So I also haven't mentioned H.L. Hunt, who isn't on the record as being a supporter, but what a racist. He used his media empire to promote his extreme views. He had a radio station. When you read transcripts, you're like, oh, okay, this guy's racist. But here's the thing. He was widely condemned by other conservatives. So William F. Buckley Jr. called it Yahoo bigotry, and that he said that Hunt gave conservatives a bad name. So we're not trying to lump all of them together, all of anybody together, but there you go. Many of the cities with American Nazi Party chapters were the same ones I mentioned that had rings that were trafficking boys. If you map them out, they almost match up perfectly. And trust me, I've done it. So if you take a little pen, you put it in all the cities with American Nazi Party chapters, which you can look that up. And if you look up where the known sex trafficking rings that we had of boys, if you map them out, they perfectly match up, as well as the camps that I was talking about that the Boone had in the 1930s. So I went on that little tangent there, and I know it was a lot. Sorry about that, but not really. So here you go. We have the Texas Big Rich. We had their ties to the mafia. It has been documented. We have politicians tied to both the northern and southern Big Rich and the mafia. It has been documented. We have politicians, the Big Rich, and the mafia tied to the chicken hawk trade. It has been documented. We have the Big Rich and politicians tied to the American Nazi Party and groups affiliated with it, like the KKK and other white supremacist organizations. It has been documented. All of this has been documented. And it all has its own little ties, and you can all tie it together. So the question remains, how does white supremacy connect to organized crime? And then, of course, how does it connect to the sex trafficking that we think was going on in Houston? And, of course, the big question is, how does it link to Dean Corll? Well, this is how I think it goes down. Traditional Italian-American crime families never really established themselves in Houston the way they did in Dallas, and of course in the way they did in Chicago, New York, the ways that we already know that they set up, Vegas, so on. In Houston, it was there, but it wasn't the same, maybe except for Galveston. So in Galveston during the Prohibition years, there was a lot of mafia things going on there. Galveston, in its prime, in its heyday, it was like the Vegas Strip. It was a cool area. Frank Sinatra came out, performed, a bunch of famous people. So there you have it. So maybe back then, they were prominent, but in the 1970s, the Houston Heights, for example, because this is where a lot of this case was set, it was affected by big-time organized crime, but it was like a more local and arguably even a more dangerous group of criminals who almost rejected the mafia's code and hierarchies. And it was an organized crime syndicate who had their own set of rules. And that group, I believe, was the Dixie Mafia. The Dixie Mafia is a loosely connected network of Southern criminals that stretched from Southeast Texas up to Dallas and east out through Louisiana and out that way. The Dixie Mafia often worked with the Italian crime syndicates, which the Marcello family in New Orleans, so on, and they were connected to them for gambling, drug trafficking, and prostitution. The Marcellos even hired the Dixie Mafia to collect debts and carry out contract killings to take care of loose ends. Harrelson, Woody Harrelson's dad, he was one of those guys. He was a hitman. And he worked with the Dixie Mafia. The Dixie Mafia crews also worked closely with white supremacist groups. It fueled much of the violence, corruption, and scams that affected the South. They even did, the Dixie Mafia did one out of prison called the Lonely Hearts Club. And you can look into that. It was a scam that ran from the prisons. The Dixie Mafia did it. They were contacting gay men through ads and getting them to send money. It was kind of like a Tinder swindler, but back then. But the Dixie Mafia worked with the American Nazi Party, for example. They worked with the KKK. And of course, all of these shared a white supremacist worldview, and their criminal activities overlapped. For the Dixie Mafia, of course, profit was just the main goal. And, for the white supremacists, getting illegal funds to support their agenda and getting political support was their goal. And then, of course, the politicians were funded by, but also protected the wealthy men. And then who, they turn around and fund the extremist groups and then hire the Dixie Mafia, and the beat goes on. In Houston, the Dixie Mafia, like the Italian Mafia in other cities, controlled a large part of the illegal stuff going on, as well as the Houston nightlife. So they ran nightclubs, bars, and even parts of the music scene. They used them for money laundering and other legal activities. And so now, of course, On the heels of all that, we finally get to the Candyman Dean Corll. What we've learned about Dean Corll and his crews, like some of whom were his victims, they were deeply involved in crime, home burglaries, auto theft, selling illegal narcotics. That is why he initially brought Elmer Wayne Henley Jr., into the fold. He wanted him to steal for him and sell drugs for him and all that illegal stuff. So it wasn't until later that he said, hey, I want you to bring these boys and you'll get $200 a pop for them. And then one thing led to another thing, and it escalated. Dean was suspected of having ties to the Dixie Mafia, which totally makes sense given his history. He grew up in Vidor and in Pasadena, and both were KKK hotbeds at the time. I didn't know this, but in 1970s and 80s, in Pasadena, there were hooded Klansmen handing out literature on the streets. And there was a Klan bookstore that even operated openly on Red Bluff Road, which is a main road in Pasadena. And check this out, and you'll see why I took you down this Nazi path to begin with. All of this comes together when you fold in information provided by a tipster who contacted HPD only weeks after Dean Corll was killed by Elmer Wayne Henley Jr. and after the bodies of the boys were found. On October 24th, 1973, HPD received a letter from a man named Stephen Dale Ahern from Los Angeles. He claimed to be a male prostitute and a model for gay pornographic magazines and films, and that he was also a member of the American Nazi Party. I know, gay Nazis. Who would have thought it? But, side note, there is actually a long-standing notion that alleges homosexual men were numerous and prominent within the original Nazi Party. I'm reading a book now by Andrew Walkerfuss titled Stormtrooper Families, Homosexuality and Community in the Early Nazi Movement that discloses this history. The American Nazi Party during the 60s and 70s also had closeted gay members as well. There was these two men, Dan Burroughs and Matt Cole, were high up in the party and entrenched in Nazi ideology, and they were both believed to be gay. I have to state this, okay? Queer identity and violence rarely go hand in hand, and gay Nazis is just not a thing, at least from the people I know. And violence, all of that, white supremacy, it happens in straight communities and gay communities, I guess. So I don't know. You can't correlate the two in my book, gay and Nazi. It just doesn't make sense. I do notice that when gay violence happens in this capacity that we're talking about, it is usually due to their repressed sexuality and self-hate more so than it's because of. And I think that it's also internal homophobia and self-hate, like I said. And that's what could have happened to Dean Corll and even John Wayne Gacy and Randy Kraft, William Bond, and Patrick Kearney, all those guys. But back to Stephen Dale Ahern, the gay former Nazi, who was telling police about what was going on. So he shared with HPD some interesting things. Also about Dean Corll, he said he flew to Houston from LA in 1971. And when he came in, he was to be photographed by a man named Roy C. Ames. He said in Houston, there was a huge pornographic empire that produced films, books, and photos that specifically exploited young boys. He claims some of the victims of the Houston mass murders were also photographed by this man named Roy C. Ames. He even saw pictures of these boys in pornographic magazines. Ahern's also stated that Roy C. Ames was friends and knew Dean Corll, and he used him to exploit young boys. And Ahern stated that he went to an S&M party at Dean Corll's house in Pasadena. So, I'm sure you're wondering now, who is Roy C. Ames? And how does he fit into this wild web of a story? And that is something that we're going to go over on our next episode because I am out of time. But stay tuned because I'm going to do that one super, super fast because I just want to get all of this out together. Because I know my mind goes all over the place and you're like, I can't follow her. So just, I don't know, get a pen and a paper. I feel like all of this is important and this is the way my brain works. So next episode will be out shortly. I'm going to keep going on this. We're going to talk about Royce Ames. We're going to talk about the things that he did and the things that he was a part of. We'll talk more about Dean Corll. I've recently found out some other juicy biddies, so I'm going to go over that too. And then finally, we're going to end up talking about all the boys and how I believe that they were connected to these things one way or another. That'll be coming up. But for now, I'm going to bounce. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate that. And coming in and liking and all the things. Hopefully you had a chance to get on Hulu and go to Texas True Crime, the TV show on Hulu. I'm on season 6, episode 2. There's a case that I did on my very first season of Crude Acts. It's about Mary Stiles. So go check that out. It's an interesting case and it's very heartbreaking, but it's pretty wild because who committed this horrible act, you'll be surprised to learn. Anyways, go check that out. Thanks again, Russell, for doing all my sound and stuff. And thank you, Amy, for keeping me on track. Thank you for the music, 2 Star Symphony. You are awesome. You know, I love you guys. And we'll see you next time. All right. Bye.